Lecture 12, Presentation 4, Allow me to elaborate. Symbolic thought elaboration. There is further evidence of the evolution of symbolic thought. Some might call the data art, but that term is as challenging to define as is the term culture. Both involve variables which spring from individual and social experience. Let's look for a feature that indicates the artistic impulse, no matter how modest, and can be found in archaeological data. I call it elaboration, which I define as embellishment for non-utilitarian purpose. For example, humans today elaborate constantly. We take utilitarian objects and embellish with abandon. Here we have a utilitarian set of objects. They're all cars, but we've embellished upon them with the fun Hello Kitty stuff to down below the fun I'm having a good time Volkswagen to the one above, which is the I've got too much money for my own good and want you to know it, BMW. All right, so the utilitarian aspect is the vehicle, the elaboration is the decoration, the culture, the whatever you want to call it that tells somebody something else. Our oldest evidence of elaboration dates to Middle Stone Age Africa, 80 to 75,000 years ago. At Blombos Cave, South Africa, modern humans etched hatch marks on two pieces of ochre, that is that iron oxide mineral that is associated with ritual and symbolic thought in many traditional peoples. Hatch marks may not seem very impressive, but we need to think of them in this way. They are elaborations that embellish an object for purposes other than utility. And I have had some students who thought maybe they were sharpening stones on these iron oxide chunks of rock. No way, it crumbles apart easily and is not useful for sharpening anything. Ochre pigments were used by both Homo sapiens populations, that is, both Neanderthal and modern humans, at burials, as the color for paint, and may have been ascribed with magical or spiritual properties. Ochre is not a rock, it is a large-grained, crumbly iron oxide material. The 60,000-year-old Middle Stone Age Diepkloof rock shelter in South Africa included ochre dyed and engraved ostrich eggshells. So you can see them all around the page here with dots and different colors and different markings on them. These objects were probably used as water containers, but people took the time to decorate them. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, these small bone awls and crab claws, which are not shown here, were used to construct the next objects. At 80 to 75,000 years, this is the world's oldest known jewelry. It includes over 30 shell beads pierced to be strung as a necklace. Pierced and ochre-painted shells were recovered from Neanderthal sites in Spain dating to 50,000 years ago. Over on the left, there was ochre paint on the object on the right side over in the left, and it looks like, let me see if I can get some help here. It looks like it's all worn off of here. But these objects both have piercings in them. Here's a piercing and here's another. They were probably used as earrings by this Neanderthal. Okay, and these come from Neanderthal sites in Spain dating to 50,000 years ago. Think about that. Really cool. Why do it? Because you like it. The late Middle Paleolithic pierced objects here come from Arcy-sur-Coeur in France. At various times, both Neanderthal and modern human populations occupied the site. Stratigraphic mixing of the 15 occupation layers makes it impossible to assign the trinket specifically to either population. Both were using some aspect of these items. And you've got teeth, such as these beautiful canines over here. Let me see if I can show you those. So canine right here, and this canine is particularly good. It's an upper canine. It's extra curved, and here's another canine. All sorts of teeth through here, and then bone up here that has been modeled in some means to represent something. This doesn't serve any purpose other than the symbolic or elaboration purpose. Upper Paleolithic modern humans took bling to new levels. Here we see Upper Paleolithic jewelry from Eurasian sites. Over on the left, we've got some antler and bone beads from Siberia. Then we've got more of these shell beads from France and also from Turkey. Notice the ones in Turkey date to 40,000 years ago. 3 Upper Paleolithic modern humans were recovered from burials dating to 32 to 28,000 years ago at Sungur Cave in Russia. By the way, if you do a Google on Sungur, sometimes it doesn't have the H in it. All were covered in red ochre, and the burials included over 13,000 perforated heads. Sungur I is shown here. He was a 60-year-old male adorned with ivory and Arctic fox beads. And I'm going to talk to you for a moment about the details of these burials. Some of the beads were strung together and others had been attached to clothing that decayed away over time. The man also wore 25 bracelets carved from mammoth ivory, but his burial was not the richest burial at the site. Sungur II and III were 2 juveniles 13 and 10 years old. They had been buried head to head in a single grave. Some interpret this as evidence of a twin sacrifice, but supporting data are weak. And here you see a nice reconstruction of the burials. Burial goods with the youngsters included 2 spears, carved from mammoth tusk, carved ivory objects, and thousands of perforated ivory beads. My favorite objects in this burial are this one here. This looks like it might have been some sort of horse or quadrupedal animal right around through here, and you can see back here there's a large hole, so either it was worn on a necklace or it was sewn into clothing. And then over here, this is really fantastic. This object right here, the circular disc, can be seen right here, and it is probably for a child's spear to show them where they should place their hands to get balance on the spear, like training wheels on a 2-wheel bike. Pretty neat item to find in the archaeological record. It is interesting that both children had enamel hypoplasia, suggesting malnutrition, but had more elaborate burials than the adult male. The Sungur burials evidence the expenditure of thousands of hours of work in a non-subsistence activity. They're not about food getting. Why were these individuals so important to this population? We don't have an answer to that question, but the graves and ornate burial goods indicate a culture with some wealth disparity and perhaps social stratification. Some people held higher ranks than others. At 32 to 28,000 years in age, Sungur appears to be the earliest known chiefdom, a complex social system involving single leadership. There is some controversy about that, but it is rather interesting. Sometimes it is difficult to discern where the pragmatic and aesthetic depart. For example, look at the oldest known human-made dwellings. These were constructed across Upper Paleolithic Eastern Europe and Western Siberia in Asia. Some of the mammoth bone dwellings may have been as old as 40,000 years in age. Both Neanderthal and modern human populations were in the region at that time. Either or both of them could have been doing these. Mammoth bone dwellings served a purpose, but they also reflect choices about design. They were built in a circular manner, and one of the interesting things about them is when they were abandoned and collapsed from disuse, they make a big circle mound of mammoth bones. They're very distinct. What you would do is use certain bones, long bones for example, to make up the walls of the structure. Then you could use the tusks to make the roof. Then you'd line the whole thing with mud and grasses and throw skins over the top of the whole thing, and the family would sit in a circular setting. Now, why circular instead of oblong or square? This was a matter of choice. And 30,000 years ago, Homo sapiens peoples in the Caucasus Mountains at Zudzuana Cave in Georgia moved beyond construction of clothing from animal skins. They produced textile fibers. The world's oldest cloth was made from wild flax plants. And plants were also used to dye the yarn. Black, yellow, green, blue, violet, red. Why? People liked the elaboration. It served no purpose. They liked it. Both Neanderthal and modern human peoples were in the region and could have been the textile makers. That has not been determined yet. Now you are ready for Lecture 12, Presentation 5.